You know the feeling before you can name it. The tightness in your chest arrives first, a small contraction you barely notice at the beginning, standing in a crowded subway car or walking through a bustling shopping centre. During the holidays, the air suddenly feels thinner than it should. Sounds around you merge into a single indistinct hum that presses against your eardrums. And when someone brushes past you, their shoulder grazing yours, you flinch inward, as though your body is trying to fold into itself, to become smaller and less present and less exposed. Everyone else seems fine when you look around. They scroll through their phones, chat with friends, move through the space, with an ease that feels almost alien to you. And that's when the second wave arrives. Not just the overwhelm itself, but the bewilderment at your own reaction. The question forms quietly. Why is this so hard for me? Why does something so ordinary feel so impossible? A specific kind of loneliness comes with feeling overwhelmed in crowds. Hundreds of people surround you sometimes, and yet you've never felt more isolated because what you're experiencing is invisible. No outward sign exists of the storm happening inside you, the way your nervous system is firing on all cylinders, the way your thoughts are fragmenting, the way you're mentally calculating the nearest exit, even though there's no actual danger. Pushing through it becomes your strategy sometimes. You tell yourself it's nothing, that you're being dramatic, that you just need to breathe and get over it. But the body doesn't negotiate. Messages arrive in a language older than words, tension in your shoulders, a slight tremor in your hands. The overwhelming urge to simply leave and find somewhere quiet where you can breathe again. What makes it even more confusing is the inconsistency. Some days you can navigate a crowded space with relative ease, and other days even a moderately busy coffee shop feels like too much. This unpredictability adds another layer of anxiety because you can't trust yourself, can't predict when you'll be okay and when you'll need to escape. Strategies have developed without you even realizing it. Arriving early to events lets you choose where to sit. Positioning yourself near exits becomes automatic. Avoiding peak hours when you can turns into routine. Reading the energy of a space within seconds of entering it, scanning for density and noise levels, and how trapped you might feel. These aren't conscious decisions anymore, but survival mechanisms woven into the fabric of how you move through the world. What you might not know is how common this actually is. Research suggests that anywhere from 15 to 20% of people experience some form of sensory overwhelm in crowded environments, but we don't talk about it much because it feels like a personal failing, like something you should be able to control, like weakness. But what if it isn't weakness at all? What if what you're experiencing is your nervous system doing exactly what it was designed to do, just in a context it wasn't designed for? Your overwhelm in crowds isn't a flaw in your character. It's not evidence that you're broken or less capable than everyone else, but a response, a deeply rooted, protective response that made perfect sense for most of human history. The problem is that the world has changed faster than our biology could keep up. Humans lived in small groups for hundreds of thousands of years. 30 people, 50, maybe 150 at most, and your brain evolved to recognize faces, to track relationships, to feel safe within a known community. When strangers appeared, when your personal space was invaded, when too much was happening at once, those were genuine threats, and your ancestors who paid attention to those signals, who felt that discomfort and acted on it, were the ones who survived. Now you live in a world where you might encounter more strangers in a single subway ride than your great-great-great-grandmother met in her entire lifetime. Your nervous system is still running on ancient software, trying to process a modern reality it was never designed for. So when you feel that tightness in your chest, when the world becomes too bright and too loud and too much, you're not malfunctioning. You're experiencing the collision between who you are biologically and where you are culturally, feeling the weight of being a deeply sensitive organism, trying to survive in an environment of constant, overwhelming stimulation. And maybe that's not something to fix, maybe it's something to understand. Your brain doesn't experience a crowd the way you think it does. Stepping into a dense gathering of people, you imagine you're processing the scene as a unified whole, a crowd, an event, a space full of strangers, but that's not what's actually happening. Your brain is attempting to process each person individually, to assess each face for threat or familiarity, to track each moving body in your peripheral vision. And it's happening faster than conscious thought, faster than you can notice. Deep in the oldest parts of your brain, in structures that existed long before language or abstract thinking, a small almond-shaped cluster of neurons called the amygdala functions as your internal alarm system, constantly scanning your environment for anything that might pose danger. In the world your ancestors inhabited, this system was beautifully calibrated, alerting them to the rustling in the bushes, the unfamiliar face at the edge of camp, the sudden change in the crowd's energy that might signal conflict. But your amygdala can't tell the difference between a genuine threat and an overwhelming sensory experience. To this ancient part of your brain, too many unpredictable moving bodies, too much noise, too much sensory input arriving all at once, all of this registers as potential danger, not because anything bad is actually happening, but because the sheer volume of information exceeds what your threat detection system can comfortably process. And that's when it does what it was designed to do, triggering your sympathetic nervous system and flooding your body with cortisol and adrenaline. Your heart rate increases while your breathing becomes shallow. Your muscles tense in preparation for action. Blood flow redirects away from your digestive system and toward your limbs. Your pupils dilate, trying to take in more visual information, and you're entering a state of hypervigilance where every aspect of your physiology is preparing you to fight or flee from a threat that doesn't exist. But here's where it gets even more complex. You have something called a personal space bubble, an invisible boundary around your body that you need to maintain for psychological comfort. And the size of this bubble varies from person to person, shaped by culture and personality and past experiences. For some people it extends 18 inches, for others it might be 3 or 4 feet. In a crowd this boundary is violated constantly. Bodies press against you. Strangers invade the space that your nervous system considers sacred, and each violation sends a small signal of distress to your brain. 1 or 2 violations might be manageable, but in a dense crowd they're constant and relentless. Your nervous system never gets a chance to recalibrate or return to baseline. You're stuck in a sustained state of low-level threat response, and there's no relief. Then there's the sensory layer. Your brain is receiving input from every direction, conversations overlapping, music playing, announcements echoing, footsteps and laughter, and the rustle of clothing, the smell of perfume and sweat and food all mingling together. For someone with a sensitive nervous system, this isn't just background noise, but a cacophony that your brain attempts to process simultaneously. Most people have a natural filter that helps them tune out irrelevant sensory information. They can focus on one conversation while unconsciously dismissing the dozens of others happening around them. But if you're highly sensitive, and research suggests about 20% of people are, your filters are more porous. You take in more, notice more, feel more, and what seems like a manageable environment to someone else can feel to you like standing in the middle of a sensory hurricane. And there's something else happening that you might not have considered: the loss of control. In a crowd, you cannot move at your own pace, swept along by the collective momentum, your body governed by forces outside yourself. You can't choose your route, can't decide when to stop or slow down. And this loss of autonomy, even temporary, even minor, can be deeply unsettling to the nervous system because control is safety and predictability is safety. And in a crowd, both dissolve. What's particularly fascinating is that this overwhelm isn't the same as social anxiety, though the two can coexist. Social anxiety is rooted in fear of judgment, fear of humiliation, fear of how others perceive you, while crowd overwhelm is often more about the sensory and spatial experience itself. You're not necessarily worried about what people think of you, but struggling with the sheer intensity of being surrounded, of having your senses flooded, of feeling your autonomy slip away. Some researchers describe this as a form of overstimulation, the point at which your nervous system receives more input than it can effectively process. Think of it like a computer trying to run too many programs at once. Eventually things start to lag, processing slows down, the system becomes unstable, and for you, that instability manifests as anxiety, as the urgent need to escape, as the feeling that you can't quite catch your breath. Your brain is also contending with something called cognitive load. In a crowd, you're navigating a constantly shifting environment, predicting where people will move, adjusting your path to avoid collisions, monitoring for obstacles, tracking the location of your companions if you are with others. All of this requires continuous mental processing, and it's exhausting in a way that's difficult to articulate. You're not doing anything strenuous, and yet you feel drained afterward, depleted in a way that sleep doesn't quite restore. And perhaps most importantly, your overwhelm isn't a choice. It's not something you can simply decide not to feel. Your nervous system operates largely outside of conscious control. You can't will your amygdala to relax, can't command your sympathetic nervous system to stand down. And what you're experiencing is an automatic physiological response, as involuntary as your heartbeat, as reflexive as pulling your hand away from a hot surface. Understanding this doesn't make the overwhelm disappear, but it does something equally important. It removes the shame. Because once you understand that your reaction is biological, that it's rooted in the way your particular nervous system is wired, you can stop asking what's wrong with you and start asking what you need. There's a particular kind of erasure that happens in crowds, and it touches something deeper than sensory overwhelm. You become part of a mass. Your individuality, the specific contours of who you are, the thoughts you're thinking, the life you're living, all of it dissolves into the collective. And you're no longer a person with a name, with a history, with desires and fears. You're a body in a sea of bodies, indistinguishable and anonymous, and for some people this dissolution feels like freedom. But for you, it might feel like disappearing. Psychologists call this de-individuation, the loss of self-awareness that occurs when you're subsumed into a group. For some, it's liberating to shed the weight of individual identity, to move through the world without the burden of being seen. But if you're someone who already struggles with feeling invisible, with feeling like your inner life goes unnoticed, then being absorbed into a crowd can trigger a quiet panic. It's not just overwhelm, but the sensation of ceasing to exist as yourself. And there's a paradox buried in this experience. You can feel utterly alone in a crowd, more alone than you ever feel in actual solitude. Because loneliness isn't really about being physically isolated, but about disconnection. It's about being surrounded by people and feeling that not one of them sees you, knows you, could possibly understand what's happening inside you in this moment. And the crowd becomes a mirror, reflecting back your own invisibility. For others, the overwhelm is less about anonymity and more about exposure. You feel hypervisible, as though every stranger's gaze is a small invasion, and you become acutely aware of your body, of how much space you're taking up, of whether you're walking too slowly or standing awkwardly. You're not disappearing into the crowd, but trapped in a spotlight of your own making, convinced that everyone is noticing you even though rationally you know they're not. The specific texture of your overwhelm also depends on the type of crowd. A concert might feel different from a busy shopping mall, which feels different from a packed subway car, and each environment carries its own particular challenges. At a concert, the noise is intentional, overwhelming by design, and your body vibrates with the bass while lights strobe and there's nowhere to rest your senses. In a shopping mall, it's the aimlessness, the consumerism, the artificial lighting, the recycled air, while on the subway it's the forced intimacy, the way you can feel someone's breath on your neck, the way you're pressed against strangers' bodies without consent. And sometimes your overwhelm is rooted in something that happened long ago, something your conscious mind might have forgotten but your body remembers. Maybe you were lost in a crowd as a child, separated from your parent in a department store. And the terror of that moment left an imprint. Or maybe you were pushed or trampled in a crowd or witnessed something frightening. Trauma doesn't always announce itself clearly, but sometimes just leaves behind a heightened sensitivity, a wariness that you can't quite explain. Culture shapes this experience too. Growing up in a place where personal space was abundant, where crowds were rare, then moving to a densely populated city can feel like sensory assault because your nervous system hasn't had generations to adapt. The expectations are different too. In some cultures, physical closeness is normal, even comforting, while in others, it's an intrusion, and you carry these learned responses in your body, influencing how safe or threatened you feel in any given space. There's also the question of control over the experience. choosing to attend a crowded event, a festival you're excited about, a concert you've been anticipating, can feel entirely different from being forced into a crowd during your commute. When you choose, when you have agency, your nervous system interprets the situation differently, and the same physical environment that feels unbearable on a Tuesday morning rush hour might feel manageable, even enjoyable, when you've decided to be there. But perhaps what's most misunderstood about crowd overwhelm is that it's not actually about other people. You might be deeply social, someone who loves intimate conversations and meaningful connections. You might have close friendships, a partner, a family you adore, and your overwhelming crowds doesn't contradict any of that, because what you're responding to isn't people themselves, but the specific configuration of too many people, too close together, for too long, in an environment where you have little control. Introversion and crowd overwhelm aren't the same thing either, though they can overlap. Plenty of introverts can navigate crowds just fine. They might find them draining but not overwhelming, and plenty of extroverts experience crowd overwhelm, finding themselves energized by social interaction but depleted by sensory chaos. What you're experiencing exists on its own axis, related to but distinct from where you fall on the introversion, extroversion spectrum. Sometimes the overwhelm arrives with a specific thought pattern. You become hyper-aware of all the things that could go wrong. What if there's an emergency and you can't get out? What if you have a panic attack and everyone sees? What if you faint or vomit or lose control in some embarrassing way? These thoughts aren't irrational exactly, but your mind's attempt to make sense of the physical sensations you're experiencing, to create a narrative that explains why your body is responding as though you're in danger. And here's what's particularly cruel about it. The more you try to suppress your overwhelm, the more intense it becomes. Resistance amplifies, and when you tell yourself you shouldn't feel this way, when you judge yourself for your reaction, your nervous system interprets that internal conflict as additional threat. You're not just dealing with the crowd anymore, but dealing with your own self-criticism, your shame, your frustration at yourself, and the overwhelm multiplies. What you're feeling isn't simple. It's not just one thing, but biology and psychology and history and culture, all converging in a single moment, in your specific body, creating an experience that belongs entirely to you. There's something you need to understand before anything else. You don't need to be fixed. The world will tell you otherwise. It will suggest that your sensitivity is a problem to be solved, that your overwhelm is a limitation to overcome. But what if your response to crowds isn't a deficit? What if it's information? What if your nervous system is simply more attuned, more responsive, more honest about what it needs? Learning to navigate crowds when you're easily overwhelmed isn't about becoming someone you're not. It's about developing a relationship with your own nervous system, learning its language, respecting its signals, and it's about finding small ways to create safety within yourself, even when the external environment feels chaotic. Sometimes it starts with something as simple as your breath. Not the forced conscious breathing that you do when you're trying to calm down, that often backfires by adding another task to an already overwhelmed system, but just noticing your breath, feeling the air move in and out, not changing it, but just witnessing it. And this tiny act of attention can create a point of focus, a small island of stability in the sensory storm. Your body exists in space, and sometimes remembering that, really feeling it, can help. You can press your feet into the ground and feel the solid surface beneath you. You can place one hand on your chest and one on your stomach, creating a tangible connection with yourself. These aren't tricks or techniques exactly, but ways of coming back to the fact of your physical presence, of remembering that underneath the overwhelm you're still here, still intact. And maybe you learn to prepare differently, not in the sense of armouring yourself, but in the sense of honouring what you know about yourself. And if you know that crowds drain you, you can plan recovery time afterward, space to be alone, to let your nervous system settle. If you know that certain times of day are harder, you can adjust when possible. If you know that having an exit strategy helps, you can arrive early, choose your position thoughtfully, give yourself permission to leave if you need to. There's a kind of radical acceptance available to you here. You can stop fighting against your own nature, stop wishing you were different, and you can acknowledge that yes, crowds are hard for you, and that's okay. It doesn't make you weak or broken, but makes you someone with a sensitive nervous system, navigating a world that wasn't designed with that sensitivity in mind. Sometimes it helps to reframe what's happening. Instead of seeing your overwhelm as panic or dysfunction, you can recognize it as your body's attempt to protect you. Your nervous system is doing its job, perhaps overzealously, but with the genuine intention of keeping you safe. You can thank it even. You can say internally that you see it's trying to protect you, and you appreciate that. But we're okay right now. But there are also moments when the overwhelm's too much, when it's not just about crowds, but about something deeper. When it starts to limit your life in ways that feel unbearable. When it's accompanied by panic attacks or severe anxiety. When it's connected to trauma that needs attention. These are moments that might call for additional support. Therapy, particularly approaches like EMDR or somatic experiencing, can help reprocess traumatic memories or recalibrate an overactive threat response. And medication can sometimes help regulate a nervous system that's chronically dysregulated. There's no shame in seeking help. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit that you can't do it alone. You might also find that gradual exposure helps, not forced, not traumatic, but gentle. Spending small amounts of time in mildly crowded spaces allows your nervous system to learn that it can handle it, that you can survive the discomfort and come out okay on the other side, not to cure yourself, but to expand the range of what feels tolerable. And maybe you discover that there are ways to be in crowds that work better for you. Arriving early before the density builds, positioning yourself at the edges rather than in the center, wearing headphones to buffer the auditory overwhelm, going with someone you trust whose presence itself is calming. These aren't failures to engage with the world properly, but intelligent adaptations, ways of honoring both your desire to participate and your need for regulation. What matters most is compassion. Compassion for the days when you can't do it, when you have to cancel plans or leave early, or avoid something entirely. Compassion for the slower pace your nervous system requires. Compassion for the fact that what looks easy for others genuinely isn't easy for you, and that's not a moral failing. You're not less evolved or less mature because crowds overwhelm you. You're not missing some crucial life skill, but a human being with a particular neurobiological makeup, trying to exist in environments that challenge that makeup, and you're doing the best you can. Maybe the goal isn't to stop feeling overwhelmed. Maybe it's to feel overwhelmed and know that you're still okay, that the feeling will pass, that you can tolerate discomfort without it destroying you. And maybe it's learning to hold space for your own complexity, to be both someone who struggles in crowds and someone who is whole, capable, worthy of gentleness. Because here's the truth that often gets lost. Your sensitivity isn't just a burden. The same nervous system that makes crowds difficult also makes you deeply perceptive. You notice subtleties others miss. You feel textures and temperatures and emotional atmospheres with unusual clarity. You might be more creative, more empathetic, more attuned to beauty, and your overwhelm and your gifts come from the same source. So you don't have to fix yourself. You don't have to become someone who thrives in crowds, but just have to learn to live with kindness toward the person you actually are. Someone who feels deeply, who needs space to breathe, who navigates the world with an exquisite, sometimes painful sensitivity. And that perhaps is enough.